What is the creepiest thing you've seen that you can't explain? Story 1. When I worked in the medical field, I once had a dream about one of my patients, a very kind elderly woman whom I used to visit once or twice a week. In the dream, she came to me dancing and joyfully told me that she was no longer in pain. Watching her dance after seeing her suffer for so many years made me incredibly happy. The next morning when I arrived at work, I told my coworkers about the dream, and later that morning we received a call from her daughter informing us that she had passed away the night before. I cannot explain it, but I am grateful that I had mentioned the dream to my coworkers before the call. Otherwise, they might never have believed me. It was such a strange yet beautiful experience, and it felt comforting to know she was finally at peace. Story 2. In the fall of 2009, I was extremely sick. It was just a few weeks before my amputation, and I was battling a severe bone infection. I was on multiple antibiotics administered through a peripherally inserted central catheter line and also taking strong pain medication. I am a huge fan of the New York Yankees, so my best friend got us tickets for the American League Championship Series game at Yankee Stadium. She pushed me around the stadium in a wheelchair, wrapping me in layers of blankets since it was freezing, just to make me smile. When she left our seats to get hot dogs and snacks, something strange happened. As soon as she walked away, an older Irish gentleman sat beside me. He offered me some of his hot chocolate that was spiked with liquor, but I politely declined and explained that I was on heavy medication. We started talking, and I told him about my situation. He asked if I was afraid of the upcoming amputation, and I admitted that I was terrified of the unknown. He gave me comforting advice and told me that everything would be fine. He said, if you have to be an amputee, try to be the best one there is. When my friend returned with food, she asked who I had been talking to. I looked beside me. No one was there. I must have imagined him, but it felt more like some kind of guardian or angel who came to reassure me that I would be okay. I guess my guardian angel is an Irishman with spiked hot chocolate. Story 3, I was driving home from work on a rural back road, following a car that was the same make, model, and year as mine, just a different color. A little further down, both of us got into the turn lane to make a left onto a long, straight road with open fields on each side. The car in front of me turned first, and I waited a few seconds for another vehicle to pass before turning as well. It took no more than 5 seconds, but when I turned onto the road, the car ahead had completely disappeared. The road had no turnoffs, and it stretched straight for miles, so I should have easily seen it. The car had just vanished, and I still think about it to this day. I have a dashboard camera now, but I wish I had one back then because I constantly question what really happened. I am absolutely certain the car didn't make a U-turn. The road was too narrow to do that without performing a 3-point turn or driving into the field. I also would have seen it because there wasn't enough time to turn completely around without causing an accident. After I turned and noticed the car was gone, I looked around and could still see the car driving behind me. But the one that looked like mine had disappeared. There was no place to pull off, and it was still daylight around 6:30 in June. The surrounding fields were filled with short cotton plants that couldn't possibly hide a vehicle. I've gone through every possible explanation, but there simply isn't a logical one. Story 4. I was having a sleepover at home with a friend from school. We were watching a movie when the strangest thought suddenly came to me. Her dog had just passed away. Obviously, I couldn't just blurt that out, so I awkwardly asked in the middle of the film, "Hey, by the way, how's your dog?" She looked surprised, understandably, since I had never met her dog and she rarely mentioned him, just that she had one. She replied that he was getting old but doing fine. We moved on, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had. The next day after she went home, she called me a little later and asked, "Why did you ask about my dog yesterday? How did you know?" Then she told me he had passed away the previous night, around the same time I asked about him. I was both shocked and strangely unsurprised. I still can't explain it, and it's such an odd coincidence since her dog was never something I really thought about. It has never happened to me again. Story 5. When I was a child, my parents and I moved across the country to Maine. We lived in a small, remote town, and our house was old and worn down, sitting deep in the forest on several acres of land. It had 2 stories, with the top floor as the main living area and the bottom floor as the bedrooms. My room had large windows looking out into the forest. I don't remember whether I had curtains or blinds, but knowing my mother's attention to detail, I probably did and must have left them open that night. I woke up in darkness and saw a faint glowing orb of light hovering outside my window. I froze in fear as it slowly drifted across one window, then the next, pausing briefly before flashing brightly into my room, and then sliding across the final window before disappearing completely. Terrified, I ran to wake my parents. My stepfather grabbed his gun and rushed outside, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything. Even now, my eyes water, remembering it. As an adult, I realized that orb was probably not something supernatural, but likely a person's flashlight. It never happened again, but ever since that night, I've never been comfortable sleeping with my blinds open. Story 6. One night, I was driving while in a foul mood and speeding, about 25 miles per hour over the limit. A dark Chevy truck got behind me, and for some reason, I instantly knew it wasn't a police vehicle. It had tinted windows and massive, strange aftermarket headlights. As soon as it got behind me, an eerie feeling came over me that I can't explain, like my body knew something wasn't right. I figured if it were a cop, I'd already be pulled over, but instead the truck just kept pace with me, also speeding. Feeling uneasy, I exited the freeway, but the truck followed. I turned into a gas station, thinking that if something happened, at least the cameras might capture it and give my family closure. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. As I got out of my car, the truck rolled its window down. What I saw still haunts me. A man with a severely disfigured face, almost like the character Rocky Dennis from that old movie about the boy with the rare facial condition. He motioned for me to come closer with his finger. I didn't care if he was about to give me the winning lottery numbers. There was no way I was going near that truck. I bolted inside the gas station, shaking all over, and tried to explain to the clerk what had happened. They just stared at me like I was drunk or on something because my story made no sense. When I looked outside again, the truck was gone. I still have nightmares about that night. Story 7. I was driving home from work one afternoon with my brother and cousin in the car. While sitting in traffic, I noticed something strange high up in the distant sky, a small, motionless black square. I pointed it out, and both my brother and cousin saw it too, confirming that I wasn't imagining things. The object didn't move at all. It just hovered in the same spot for about 45 minutes until the sun set, and it became too dark to see. Even from far away, it was perfectly square and oddly distinct against the sky. When I got home, I searched online to see if anyone else had mentioned seeing it, but there was nothing. To this day, I still think about that strange black square in the sky and wonder what on earth I was looking at. Story 8. A tiny humanoid creature underwater. To this day, I still search the internet hoping to find out that what I saw was some kind of real sea creature, but I have never found anything that matches. I was 16 years old, snorkeling off the coast of Australia with my dad. The water was clear, the coral was beautiful, and the fish were everywhere. My dad had drifted a bit farther away, but there was a reef protecting us from large sharks, so I wasn't scared to explore alone. I dove closer to the coral to watch a small octopus when something caught my eye. A human face. It had a strange, eerie smile and big eyes just staring at me. The creature was standing casually against the coral, about 4 inches tall, its head no bigger than a grape. It looked like a tiny naked human male, but had gills on its neck, webbed feet, and perfectly smooth skin. I froze, staring at it, and it stared right back. I reached out to touch it, but it smoothly sidestepped, still smiling at me in the creepiest way. I saw my dad turning to swim back toward me, so I called him over. The little thing glanced at him, then back at me with a mischievous look, before calmly walking away on its little webbed feet and slipping down a hole in the coral. When my dad got to me, I tried explaining what I saw, but he couldn't make sense of it either. He just said something about Aboriginal spirits and told me not to mess with them. I still think about that strange little fish man every single day. Story 9. I was around 10 years old, and my younger sister was 7. Usually when she got scared at night, she would wake me up, and I would comfort her until she fell asleep. But one night was different. She shook me awake, crying uncontrollably and unable to speak. I rushed to her room, and after a few minutes, she finally told me that she had heard faint footsteps pacing up and down the small hallway between our rooms. Our bedrooms were across from each other, so we decided to stay quiet and listen. At first, we heard nothing, and I thought she might have imagined it. But then, the footsteps started again, clear, steady, and right outside the door. We were terrified, convinced that someone had broken into the house. I grabbed a pillow, thinking I could somehow protect us, even though I was shaking just as much as she was. After a couple of minutes of hearing those steps, I finally gathered the courage to yell for help and ran down the hall to wake our parents. My dad checked the entire house and the backyard but found nothing. Feeling relieved, I stayed in my sister's bed so she wouldn't be alone. About 15 minutes later, while we were both still wide awake, a deafening screech echoed from the kitchen, lasting about 2 seconds. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the tile floor. We both screamed, and our parents came running. When we reached the kitchen, one of the wooden chairs had been dragged nearly 5 meters away from the table. None of us could explain how it happened. We all stood there stunned, realizing it might have been connected to those footsteps. It's still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Story 10. This wasn't something I saw, thankfully, but something I heard that I can never explain. I was 16, spending the weekend at my dad's house in rural Australia. It was the kind of place where people didn't bother locking doors. The house was long and spread out, with my dad's loft bedroom at the front and mine all the way at the back, about 20 meters down a hallway, lined with a few rooms and a bathroom. It was just the two of us that weekend. I stayed up late on the computer, finally going to bed around 2 in the morning. I put on music to fall asleep, but after only a couple of minutes, I heard the door at the end of the hallway slam shut. I froze, took out my earphones, and called out, thinking it was my dad. Then I heard the door of an empty bedroom next to it slowly creak open. That cold, sick feeling ran through my body, and I realized something was very wrong. I stayed silent, listening. After half a minute, there was a loud thud on the wooden hallway floor, like a heavy stomp. Then another, and another. The sound kept coming in a steady rhythm, moving closer. Halfway down the hall was the bathroom with an old wooden sliding door that made a terrible noise whenever opened. The stomping stopped for about 30 seconds, and then that bathroom door was yanked open violently, with so much force it sounded like pure rage. I sat frozen, certain that my room was next, but nothing else happened. I stayed sitting up in bed until sunrise, too afraid to move. When the sun finally came up, I ran to my dad's room and told him everything. We searched the house together, every door was closed, and nothing was out of place. My dad swore he hadn't left his room and had no history of sleepwalking. I've never found a logical explanation for what happened that night. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I know deep down that whatever was in that hallway wasn't human. Even now, telling this story makes my skin crawl. Story 11. I'll start by saying that I don't really believe in the paranormal or in superstitions, although I find those topics fascinating. Still, something happened one night after leaving a movie theater with a friend that I've never been able to explain rationally. We had just watched a horror film, so we were already in a spooky mindset. While driving home out of the city toward the countryside where I lived, we noticed 3 cars pulled over along the road, each in a different spot. Then as we merged onto the highway, we saw about 8 more vehicles pulled over in random locations, each spaced out far enough that it wasn't like they were all reacting to an ambulance or a roadblock. By the time we were halfway to my house, we had counted 12 cars stopped along the highway. My friends suddenly panicked and begged me to take a back road instead, convinced that it was some kind of sign that we might end up in an accident if we stayed on that route. The rest of the drive home was completely silent. I brought it up to him once or twice since then, but he gets defensive and refuses to talk about it. Whatever it was, it really unsettled him. I still can't explain it, but it remains one of the strangest experiences I've ever had. Story 12. I was taking a trip with my then-girlfriend, and we needed to cross the Hudson River to reach our destination. Growing up in the area, I knew all the main bridges well. The plan was to take the Bear Mountain Bridge, but I missed the exit and drove past it. We didn't worry about it since the Newburgh Beacon Bridge was coming up next, and it would actually put us a little closer to where we were headed anyway. We kept driving for about 20 to 30 minutes, chatting and not paying close attention to where we were. But when we finally checked the GPS to see how far the bridge was, we realized something impossible. We were already on the other side of the river. We hadn't crossed the Bear Mountain Bridge, we hadn't crossed the Newburgh Beacon, and we definitely hadn't gone far enough to reach any of the other bridges like the Mid-Hudson or the Tappan Zee. Somehow, we had just appeared on the opposite bank without ever remembering crossing. To this day, I have no explanation. Either there's a secret tunnel under the Hudson River that no one knows about, or we accidentally slipped through some kind of spatial rift that day. Story 13. I was a resident assistant during college, and every winter the RAs returned to campus a week early for training before the students came back. That meant the dorms were completely empty except for us. One night, I woke up suddenly when I heard the door handle of my shared bathroom turning. Still half asleep, I called out my suite mate's name, thinking she might have come through to ask something. Then I froze. My suite mate was on an extended vacation in Italy. No one else should have been in our suite. I sat up and stared toward the bathroom door. It was dark, but in the dim light, I could make out the outline of a human face wearing a flat-brimmed hat. I couldn't see the details, but I could clearly make out the shadows where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. It was standing perfectly still beside the door, staring at me. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know what to do. There were no other RAs on my floor, and the nearest one was 2 stories up. No one would hear me if I screamed. I kept staring, and it felt like the face was watching me too. Then, as I shifted slightly on the bed, it vanished. I turned on the light and checked the bathroom. The door was shut tight, and there was no one there. It's been almost 7 years, and that night still gives me chills whenever I think about it. Story 14. My youngest daughter used to beg me to buy the seasonal decorations whenever we went shopping. She passed away from a brain tumor when she was 5 years old, and as a way to cope, I began collecting and decorating my house with those seasonal items throughout the year. Her favorites were these colorful little birds from Target. A couple of years ago, just before Easter, I was deep cleaning the house. One of the Easter birds went missing. I assumed one of my older kids had accidentally knocked it off the shelf with their backpack when they left for school. I looked around the area where it might have fallen but couldn't find it anywhere. We had a young dog at the time who loved chewing on everything, so I checked all of his usual hiding spots too. Still nothing. I continued cleaning the entire house top to bottom, vacuuming, dusting, organizing. By the end of the day, I still hadn't found the bird. I laughed to myself and said out loud, "Daughter, it's okay if you're playing with it, but please let me know somehow so I'll know the dog didn't destroy it." I walked to the kitchen, put away my cleaning supplies under the sink, and when I came back into the living room, there it was. The missing bird, standing perfectly upright in the middle of the floor. These birds had soft, pipe cleaner-like feet that made it hard for them to stand properly, yet this one was balanced flawlessly. A chill went down my spine. I picked it up and noticed there were no teeth marks or slobber, meaning the dog hadn't gotten to it. I just smiled and said, "Thanks, daughter. You can play with it anytime you want." Then I placed it back on the shelf. I have no logical explanation for what happened that day, but deep down I believe it was her way of saying she was still there. Story 15. When I was 16, I had this friend who was always getting into trouble. He had a brand new BMW, and we thought we were invincible. Sneaking alcohol with fake IDs, smoking weed, partying, and chasing girls. It was just like one of those reckless teen movies. One night we were in the wrong place at the wrong time and got detained by the police. I stayed polite, but my friend mouthed off to them. A female officer pulled me aside and said, "Look, kid, you seem like a respectful young man. Why are you hanging out with this guy? He's bad news. Next time he asks you to go out, think twice." I didn't think much of it at the time, but her words stuck in my head. The following Friday, he called and told me to come with him to grab some booze and meet up with a few girls. I almost said yes out of habit, but I remembered what the officer had said and told him I couldn't go out that night. Later that evening, he got into a high-speed chase with the police, lost control of his car, and crashed straight into an apartment building. He died instantly. A few weeks later, I ran into that same female officer again. She joked that it wasn't a good sign that she kept running into me. I broke down crying and hugged her, telling her what had happened. She looked stunned, but I could tell she understood. I honestly believe she saved my life that night just by taking the time to warn me. Story 16. I'm a former Egyptian Air Force Mirage 2000 pilot, one of the so-called unlucky few selected for mandatory military service as pilots. It was considered unlucky because pilots had to serve far longer than regular soldiers or officers due to the extensive training involved. Fast forward 2 years and I was fully trained, though not a combat pilot since I hadn't pursued it as a full-time career. During my 3.5 years of service, I only flew about 6 times. One night, I was assigned to patrol the Red Sea border between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. My friend was flying a similar mission along the Sinai-Israel border, which was usually the more active patrol area. It was a pitch-black night when suddenly an incredibly bright light burst through the cockpit, blinding me even through the tinted glass and my helmet visor. It was so intense it reminded me of those memory-wiping flashes from Men in Black. The light lasted nearly a full minute. Just as I was about to radio it in, I heard the control tower frantically speaking, the operator's tone quick and nervous, but the signal was breaking up, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. I switched to the main pilot frequency, and everyone else was panicking too. About 30 minutes later, a calmer voice ordered all of us to land immediately due to an ongoing emergency being investigated by senior fighter pilots. We landed 2 at a time, taxied into the hangar, and climbed out. Everyone looked terrified, wide-eyed, pale, and dazed. When you tried talking to anyone, they just stare blankly and mutter, "Sorry, what were you saying?" I went straight to the base commander for answers. He was on the phone, shouting about unidentified aircraft entering Egyptian airspace. That's when the fear truly hit me. I've long finished my service and now study law in Washington, but I still think about that night constantly. I never learned what really happened up there. Story 17. Seen might be too strong a word, but in my first apartment, I experienced sleep paralysis almost every night. It was horrifying. Everything would suddenly go dark, and I couldn't move or speak. I'd feel like I was suffocating, trapped inside my own body, struggling silently until the pressure finally lifted. I started sleeping with a light on, which seemed to make it happen less often. When I eventually moved out, I tried not to dwell on it. It just gave me an uneasy, almost sick feeling. I never told my family since I worried they'd think I was losing my mind, especially with mental illness running in our family. Years later, while talking to an older relative, she mentioned that my sister-in-law had lived in that same apartment just before marrying my brother, but she'd moved out quickly. Curious, I asked why. My sister-in-law had said she kept waking up to strange sensations and would find her things moved around. About 8 years later, that same relative, who owned the apartment, asked me to retrieve something from it. It had been vacant for years and was being used for storage. I brought my daughter along, and she was unusually quiet the entire time, which was strange for her. We didn't stay long. That night, when I mentioned to her that it had once been my first apartment, she asked if I'd ever been scared there. Before I could answer, she said she'd seen something large and black clinging to the ceiling, as if it were absorbing all the light around it. I've always been skeptical of paranormal claims and try to find logical explanations for strange events. But something about that decaying, empty apartment still fills me with dread whenever I think about it. Story 18. A few years ago, I went through a period of depression. It was one of the hardest times of my life. One day, as my family was getting ready to go to a barbecue, I was brushing my teeth when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the torso and arm of a man wearing a blue and green flannel shirt. I didn't see his face, but I could swear I felt his hand touch my left forearm. When I looked up, there was nothing there. It completely unsettled me. My mother, who is a very devout Catholic, gave me a rosary and told me to keep it with me for protection. I took it with me when we left, but in the car, something strange happened. I suddenly became overwhelmingly tired, almost slipping into a dreamlike state. Then my thoughts turned dark, uncomfortably dark, before everything shifted. Out of nowhere, I felt an intense calm, a wave of peace so strong it was almost euphoric. For the first time in a long while, my mind felt completely clear. I wasn't suicidal and didn't want to die, but in that moment, I felt that if I did, everything would somehow be okay. After that day, my mental health began improving. and I gradually became a more centered, grounded person. I still don't know what really happened, whether it was something supernatural, a hallucination, or just my mind trying to heal itself, but nothing like it has ever happened again. Story 19. About 8 years ago, I moved from Pennsylvania to Venice Beach, California. It was my first time living away from home, and after a few months things got tough. I ended up having to sell my car just to afford the trip back home. One night while trying to fall asleep, I started having a mild anxiety attack, overthinking everything. Both of my roommates had moved out a few days earlier, so I had the apartment entirely to myself. In the middle of that anxiety, I started talking out loud to my grandmother, who had recently passed away, asking her for help. I'd never been religious or spiritual. I've always considered myself agnostic, but I was desperate. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed a faint flicker of light coming from my roommate's empty room. I got up, opened the door, and saw a freshly lit candle burning on the table. I hadn't lit it, and no one else was in the apartment. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to take me to church with her, and my favorite part was lighting a candle to say a prayer. I can't explain what happened that night, but somehow it felt like she was there, reminding me that everything was going to be all right. Story 20. While doing door-to-door work in a city halfway across the world from where I grew up, I knocked on a house I'd only ever driven past once before. As I stood on the porch, I noticed a window that looked straight through to another window on the opposite side of the house. I immediately recognized what was beyond that second window. The view, the colors, the layout. It was all familiar, even though I had never been there in my life. When the door opened, the woman standing there looked at me with the same startled expression I must have had. The first thing she said was, "I know you." But there was absolutely no way we had ever met before. As we talked, I started sharing a personal story, and to my shock, she finished it for me, word for word, as if she already knew it. When I asked how, she said, "I'm sure you've told me that before." I visited her a few more times afterward, trying to figure out if maybe we had mutual acquaintances or overlapping histories, but there was nothing that connected us. To this day, I can't explain it. It's as if we both stepped into a moment that had already happened before, in some other version of our lives. Story 21. When I was a sophomore in college, I walked into my math class like any other day and sat in my usual spot about 4 seats in on the third row. Even though we didn't have assigned seats, there was always a girl who sat 2 seats to my left with an empty chair between us, and her male friend sat beside her. They seemed close, always chatting and laughing, but nothing about them ever struck me as strange. One day I was sitting quietly thinking about my plans after class, when I suddenly got this eerie feeling. I looked up and to my left, and my heart nearly stopped. The girl was staring directly at me, expressionless, and her eyes were glowing an electric, piercing blue. Not light blue, not contacts actually glowing, like beams of light. It was unnatural, almost impossible to describe. I couldn't move or speak. It was as if I was paralyzed. I finally blinked, looked away, and when I turned back, she was chatting with her friend again, as if nothing had happened. 2 years later, I was riding in the back seat of a friend's car on the way to dinner during rush hour. Traffic had stopped, and when I glanced diagonally to the left, I noticed the driver in the next lane looking right at me. He had turned almost completely around in his seat, staring intensely. Even from that distance, I could see his eyes, those same bright, laser-like blue eyes. My entire body froze. Just like before, I blinked, looked away, then immediately looked back. But now he was facing forward again as the light turned green. That was 15 years ago, and I've never experienced anything like it since. But it still messes with my mind whenever I think about it. Story 22. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night and started playing with the window blind above my bed. I accidentally let it snap up, and when it rolled to the top, I saw something outside that I can still remember vividly. It was a pitch-black figure with pure white, human-like eyes staring back at me. I screamed, and it screamed back, but there was no sound. Its mouth opened, yet the scream was completely silent. Terrified, I fell off my bed, and my dad ran in when he heard me yelling that there was a black man outside my window. He grabbed his pistol and ran outside but found nothing. The next day, he installed tinted windows in my room so I could see out, but no one could see in. We were poor, but he said my terror alone convinced him something must have happened. Years later, as an adult, I told my dad more details about that night. He looked shocked when I explained that the thing had been pure black with glowing white eyes, and that our window was too high for any person to look through without a ladder. He admitted that what I described didn't make sense. Ever since then, I've never left my windows uncovered at night. I used to comfort myself by thinking that whatever it had been just as scared of me as I was of it, that maybe monsters feel fear too. But about a year ago, when I told a coworker about how it screamed back at me, she said, "Oh my God, like it was mocking you?" And suddenly it all clicked. It hadn't screamed out of fear, it had waited a moment, then copied me. It was mocking me, imitating my terror. I still haven't fully recovered from realizing that. Story 23. When I was 12 years old, back in 2007, I went camping with my dad, and though I didn't see anything strange, I definitely heard something that still gives me chills. We were sitting by the campfire late at night when a loud, unfamiliar sound filled the air. At first we thought it might be a jet, but the sky was perfectly clear. No planes, no blinking lights, nothing. It wasn't a car or a truck either. No vehicle sounds like that. The noise was deep, mechanical, and stretched on for what felt like minutes. We couldn't even tell where it was coming from, whether it was up in the sky or echoing off the nearby mountains. We just sat there listening, unsure what to think. When it finally stopped, I was so uneasy that instead of sleeping in the tent, I begged my dad to let us sleep in his truck camper. Sometime later that night, the same sound returned, loud enough to wake me. I lay there, frozen, staring into the dark until the sun finally rose. The noise never came back after that night. Over the years, we returned to that same campsite many times, but we never heard it again. The strange part is that around 2011 or 2012, people all over the world began reporting eerie horn-like sounds coming from the sky. The moment I heard those recordings, I recognized them instantly. They were the exact same sounds I'd heard that night in the woods. Even now, talking about it makes my skin crawl. Story 24. I swear this really happened. When I was in college, I shared a third-floor apartment with 7 other students. I was pretty awkward and kept to myself, so I didn't hang out much with the others. Most nights, they'd all leave around midnight to play football, except for one animation student who usually stayed behind. One night, I was up late working on an assignment while everyone was out, including the animation student. The apartment was awful, half the lights didn't work, and my door handle was broken, leaving a circular hole that let me lock and unlock it with my finger. We'd reported it, but no one ever came to fix it. I was working at the table in the dimly lit living room when I heard a chair scrape across the floor in the room behind me. I knew for sure everyone had left hours ago. I froze, then slowly closed my laptop and decided to go to my room. As I stood up, my own chair made a loud scraping noise, and immediately the chair behind me replied with an even louder one. That was enough for me. I went to my room, shut the door using my nail to turn the lock, and went to bed. When I woke up, the door was halfway open. My roommate swore he hadn't come in. 2 weeks later, I had another late-night assignment. My housemates all went out again, and eventually even the animation student left after getting a phone call. I was completely alone. I tried to focus on my work and called my mom to calm my nerves. Around 2 in the morning, I felt a vibration through the floor and heard the chair noise again. This time, I decided to check. The room was empty. I told myself I was imagining things and went back to work. But out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the door behind me slowly creaking open, just a little at a time. My body froze, and then something lightly touched my leg. I looked down and saw a plastic hanger rolling on the floor. It was still moving as if it had just been thrown. That was the last straw. I bolted out of the apartment and went downstairs. The security guard asked what I was doing, and I lied, saying I was waiting for my laundry to dry. After that, I rarely slept there again, choosing instead to stay at my family's house an hour away. Later, I found out our neighbors had experienced strange things too. I wouldn't call it the scariest experience of my life, but it still makes me uneasy because I can't explain what really happened. Now I'm doing better, with more friends and a new course, but that memory still sticks with me. Story 25. I actually have a few strange stories from when I lived in a small village of about 300 people. The main road wasn't far away, but the road through our village was tiny and quiet. The first incident happened when I was younger and had a treehouse that my friends and I built. We always joked about adding electricity and water to it, but of course, we never did. One night while I couldn't sleep, I was staring out my window toward the treehouse when suddenly it lit up. The entire thing glowed from the inside for several minutes, even though there were no lamps or power of any kind. Then the light faded and it never happened again. Around that same time, I kept having strange nightmares about aliens, and often felt like something invisible was watching me from the dark. The second story is even harder to explain. The nearest train station was about 6 kilometers away, and sometimes I had to walk home when my parents couldn't pick me up. It usually took about 45 minutes. One evening after visiting a friend, I took the 7 o'clock train and expected to be home by 8. But when I finally reached my house, it was almost 10:30. 2.5 hours had passed, and I had no memory of what happened during that missing time. I wasn't injured or tired, just deeply confused. Even now, I still think about that night, wondering what could have happened on that lonely walk home. Story 26. Sleep paralysis is one of the most terrifying experiences a person can have, and I'll never forget mine. When I was a preteen, I practically lived for my Xbox One. My parents had a small, shed-like guest house in our backyard, and they let me stay out there since I was responsible enough. I'd stay up all night gaming Battlefield, Black Ops, Minecraft, you name it. Eventually, the lack of sleep caught up with me. One night around 4 in the morning, I finally decided to go to bed. About 2 hours later, I woke up completely frozen, unable to move. In the corner of my room stood two identical girls wearing torn white medical gowns, their long black hair covering their faces. They slowly walked toward me, then passed right through my bed and body, their cold hands around my throat. I could barely move my head, but I could feel them choking me. Then they stopped, turned, and walked through the wall. I turned my head toward the bed next to mine. My friend had stayed over a few days earlier, so his bed was still there. This time I saw him sitting there staring at me. Suddenly his face twisted into something demonic, screaming as his features distorted. I must have broken free from the paralysis because I remember getting up, talking to my parents, eating breakfast, and trying to go about my day like normal. But then everything faded. My memory blurred, my vision went dark, and I woke up again in bed with a loud ringing in my ears. When I asked my parents if I'd fainted and they'd carried me to bed, they said no. They had no idea what I was talking about. That night still haunts me. It felt so real that I sometimes wonder if I ever truly woke up at all. Story 27. One evening, I was taking a shower with the bathroom window open to help with the condensation. The window overlooked the narrow side passage beside our house, about 20 feet above the gate. I finished my shower, wrapped a towel around my waist, and stepped out onto the landing just as my mom came out of her bedroom to talk to me about my laundry. Mid-sentence, we both froze. A gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream pierced the house, echoing through the open bathroom window. It was so loud and so raw that my whole body went cold. The only thing I could picture was a woman being attacked, someone being stabbed to death right outside. Without thinking, I sprinted downstairs, my towel nearly falling off, unlocking the back door with shaking hands as the screams grew louder and more desperate. I burst into the alleyway, ready to fight whoever was out there. But as soon as I swung open the gate, the screaming stopped. Everything went dead silent. The passage was pitch black. My eyes struggled to adjust, but there was no one there. Nothing. No sign of anyone. My mom joined me moments later, and we checked the entire area, turning on every outside light and scanning the front and backyards. Even our cat had heard it. She was standing on the kitchen table, alert and terrified. We have foxes in the area, and they can make strange noises. But this was nothing like that. It sounded unmistakably human, a woman in pure agony. To this day, I have no explanation for what we heard that night. Story 28. This one is long, but it's the worst experience I've ever had. I've moved around a lot in my life, and in many of the houses I've lived in, I've had smaller, similar experiences, just subtle, unsettling things. I've developed this strange instinct, like I can walk into a place and immediately feel if something's off. Most of the time I ignore it, thinking it's just my imagination. But this one was different. I lived there with a few roommates, and everyone believed the place was haunted. There was definitely activity doors opening, footsteps, the sound of people coming home when no one was there. But at first it wasn't menacing, just eerie. I had the basement room, and I'd constantly hear footsteps above me when everyone was out. The front door would open and close like someone had come in, but when I went upstairs to greet them, the house would be empty. The driveway was long, ending in a manual horse gate we always had to open and close to keep the dogs in. Many nights I'd drive home and find the gate open, only for it to be mysteriously closed again the moment I got out of the truck. I'd laugh nervously and yell out a sarcastic, "Thanks!" thinking it was some harmless spirit. Things got darker when one of my roommates had his teenage sister stay with us for a few days. She and her friends threw a small get-together, and at some point they started playing with a Ouija board. The board kept spelling out my name. I brushed it off, thinking they were joking. But after that night, everything changed. I started hearing voices and seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I became paranoid and isolated, convinced I was losing my mind. My relationships fell apart, and I spiraled into depression. Then one night, my girlfriend came over for a movie. I left the room for less than a minute to use the bathroom. When I came back, she was curled up on my bed, sobbing, clutching my barking dog, who was going wild. She refused to stay another second in that house and made us leave immediately. For weeks, she refused to talk about it. When she finally did, she said she had heard a guttural, inhuman sound. Thinking my dog was hurt, she looked up and saw one of my candles fly off the TV stand toward her. I moved out the following week. The day I left felt like escaping a war zone. Within weeks, my depression lifted, and it was like my sanity returned. I haven't had a single experience like that since, though I can't bring myself to keep candles in my home anymore. About a year later, after talking with my old roommates and sharing what we'd all gone through, I did some research and found that the house and the entire surrounding area was known for strange, unexplained activity. Story 29. Before I was born, my parents bought a house on an old street that dated back to the 1600s. My mom had chosen it because she loved family history and had discovered that a distant relative of hers had lived there in the 1930s. My dad and my granddad started renovating before the move, and every day my granddad would complain to my dad about not cleaning his paintbrushes after finishing. Then one evening, my granddad went to the house alone to get some painting done. When my parents arrived later, he was gone, and all his brushes and tools were left behind, completely uncleaned. That was very unlike him. When my mom called to ask why, he made up a weak excuse about forgetting. Years later, long after my parents had moved out of that house, my granddad finally told them the truth. He said he had been painting the hallway near the stairs when he suddenly felt an icy chill. When he turned around, he saw an old woman descending the staircase slowly and recognized her instantly as the distant family member who had lived there nearly a century earlier. Terrified, he dropped everything and ran out of the house, leaving his brushes behind. He never went back inside, and he didn't dare tell my parents what had happened until years later. Story 30. When I was a kid, my little brother and I loved exploring the woods and abandoned places around the English countryside. One of our favorite spots was an old, overgrown farmhouse. A group of us broke in one summer by kicking through the kitchen window, which was half underground and easy to reach. Inside, everything looked frozen in time. The table was still set with plates of shriveled, decades-old food, as if the family had just gotten up in the middle of dinner and vanished. We wandered through the rooms, each one coated in dust and cobwebs, the air thick with that musty, forgotten smell. It felt like our own secret clubhouse. The only door we couldn't open was a heavy wooden one upstairs. No matter how much we searched, we couldn't find a key. For some reason, I couldn't let it go. I just had to see what was behind that door. My brother and I dragged in a thick tree branch from outside and used it as a makeshift battering ram. After several hits, the latch gave way. Inside, the room was empty, except for a single cabinet bolted to the wall. In it sat one porcelain doll, perfectly clean and untouched. It didn't look creepy on its own, but something about it filled all of us with dread. We slammed the door shut and ran home. That same night, a thunderstorm rolled through, and a few days later, when we returned, the farmhouse was nothing but a heap of burned wood and ash. We figured lightning must have struck it, but when we poked through the rubble, we found that same cabinet barely charred and the doll inside, completely intact, its glass eyes pointed toward the sky. I've never run faster in my life. We moved away a year later, but I'll never stop wondering if lightning really caused that fire or if something else did. Story 31, I work in film and television production, and for one commercial shoot, we rented a digital video camera from a local vendor. It wasn't our main camera, just a backup for continuity shots. These rental cameras are constantly in use, so sometimes they still have leftover footage from the previous project, which you just delete before recording. Our cameraman called me over quietly one morning, looking uneasy. He said there was footage already on the tape that I needed to see. It showed a publicity event where a well-known actress was giving an interview. At first it seemed normal. She was smiling, talking about the product. But then she started losing focus, stumbling over her words, getting frustrated. Suddenly she snapped at the cameraman. It looked like the kind of celebrity meltdown clip that ends up viral online. I laughed awkwardly, but the cameraman looked pale. Then I realized why this actress had died by suicide just a week earlier. The footage must have been from one of her final public appearances. Watching it again with that knowledge was chilling. Her exhaustion and agitation seemed to carry a weight I couldn't ignore. I deleted the footage and made sure it was completely gone. A few weeks later, on another shoot, the same cameraman came to me again. On this new camera, rented from a different vendor, the exact same footage appeared. Same scene, same breakdown, same actress. The cameras were unrelated, the shoots weeks apart, and yet somehow that same file had found its way back. To this day, I can't explain how. Story 32. In my 20s, I spent the night at a friend's house. She usually worked night shifts, so when I started feeling tired, she decided to stay up in the living room watching movies while I went to bed in her room. Sometime later, I woke up and saw her come in. It was dark, but I recognized her by the long flowing skirt she always wore. She didn't say anything, just sat down on the edge of the bed beside me and stared out the window. I asked what she was doing, but she didn't answer. I felt overwhelmingly sleepy and drifted off again almost instantly, which was strange for me. The next morning, she asked why I had come into the living room during the night. Confused, I said I hadn't. She told me she had woken up to see me sitting on the couch by the window, silent, just staring out into the night. When I explained that she had been the one in the bedroom with me, we both froze. She said the person she saw in the living room had been wearing the same long skirt I had seen in the dark. Neither of us could explain it. She lived in a rough part of town, which was why I was staying over. Her roommate was gone, and she didn't want to be alone. She's deeply religious and later told me she believed we had been visited by guardian angels watching over us that night. I'm not sure what to believe, but I'll never forget how real that quiet, eerie moment felt. Story 33. I used to work in an office building across from an old Grand Theater. It's still operating today, but it has a dark history. Decades ago, a fire broke out during a performance and several people lost their lives. I often worked late, sometimes being the only person left on my entire floor. My desk faced the theater, and though I knew its history, I never felt uneasy. I wasn't the type to believe in ghosts. One night, while working alone, I heard faint singing coming from the direction of the ladies' restroom. It was muffled, almost like someone humming softly behind a wall. I brushed it off at first, thinking it might just be the hum of the building or my imagination, but it persisted. Knowing I was completely alone, I decided to check. The restroom was empty. Just as I turned to leave, I caught a faint smell of burning not cigarettes. Not cooking smoke, but that dry, unmistakable scent of timber burning. It lingered just long enough for my heart to start pounding. Then it was gone. I checked the kitchen and corridors, but there was nothing. When I returned to my desk, the foyer light, which was always either fully on or off, had dimmed. Not flickering, just faint, like something was draining the power. That was enough for me. I packed up, left for the night, and refused to stay late for weeks afterward. It never happened again. But sometimes, even now, when I work late and glance toward that theater, I swear I can almost smell the faint scent of smoke. Story 34. One night, my husband and I were asleep when I woke from a terrifying nightmare and decided to use the bathroom. As I walked around the bed, I noticed he was wide awake, staring at the ceiling. It startled me because in all our years together, I had never seen him awake at that hour. He's the kind of person who sleeps deeply through the night. We both asked each other if we were okay, and then eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning I brought it up, joking about our 3 a.m. meeting. His face turned serious. He told me he'd been having a nightmare about our oldest child, how they were in an elevator together when she suddenly ran out and disappeared. He searched frantically until he found a room filled with children whose hands were bound, our daughter among them. Just before he could reach her, he woke up in terror. As he told me this, I just sat there speechless. My dream had been nearly identical. In mine, I was on an escalator with our daughter, and she suddenly slipped away from me. I found her at the bottom, her hair caught in the moving stairs being pulled in. I reached for her hand, but woke up before I could save her. We had both dreamed of losing her and waking at the same moment, right before rescuing her. We still can't explain how two people could share the same horrifying dream about the same child at the exact same time. Story 35. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to hang out at this small, greasy diner late at night. It was the only place that stayed open and didn't care if teenagers just ordered coffee. We went there so often that we got to know the waitresses by name. One night, there was a new waitress, friendly but strange. We started chatting with her, asking where she was from. She said her husband was a truck driver, and they moved around a lot. We joked that it made sense given his job, but she shook her head and said, "No, we moved because the longer I stay somewhere, the more I know about people. I'm psychic. Eventually, we have to move." When she walked away, we laughed about it, calling her crazy. About 20 minutes later, she came back, sat down at our booth without saying a word, and took my friend's hands in hers. Then she started talking fast, intense, and frighteningly specific. She told my friend deeply personal details about her life, things no one could have known. She said, "You were abused by an adult family member when you were 3 years old during a birthday party. Your family knows, but they think you should just move on." My friend turned white as a sheet. Every word was true. The waitress spoke for maybe 5 minutes, and none of us could interrupt. When she finally got up, she just said, "Take care of yourself," and walked away. We saw her only once or twice more before she vanished from the diner altogether. I still don't believe in psychics, but I will never forget that woman. Story 36. When I was 16, I had a dream that changed the way I think about things I can't explain. I never met my paternal grandmother. She died 2 years before I was born. My dad rarely spoke of her, and I had never seen a single photograph because all our family pictures were stored in another city. In the dream, I was walking through a cozy little house and found myself in a living room. To my left were 2 armchairs covered in cream-colored fabric with bright green roses printed on them. In one of the chairs sat an older woman. Somehow, I instantly knew she was my grandmother, though I had no idea what she looked like. She didn't acknowledge me. She just stared at an old box television across the room. A man was singing on screen for a live audience, and when he finished, the crowd applauded. My grandmother clapped along with them, smiling. Then the dream ended. The next morning, I told my dad about it. At first, he brushed it off, but when I described the chairs, his expression changed completely. He went silent, stood up, and retrieved a small tin box from the cabinet. Inside were old photographs. He shuffled through them until he pulled out one of my grandfather sitting in one of those exact chairs. He said they'd owned that set since their wedding and only got rid of them when I was a baby. When I told him about her clapping, he froze again. "That's exactly what she used to do," he said quietly. "Every time someone sang on TV, she'd clap when the audience did." He didn't say much else after that and spent the rest of the day alone in his den. I couldn't have known any of those details. I still don't understand how it happened, but I'm grateful I got to meet her, even if it was only in a dream. Story 37. I've always thought of myself as a skeptic, but one experience when I was 16 made me question everything. From ages 12 to 17, I suffered from frequent sleep paralysis. Most nights were just terror and immobility, until one night when I saw something. I woke up unable to move, And in the corner of my room stood a tall, thin, humanoid figure, completely still, watching me. I shut my eyes, frozen with fear, and eventually drifted back to sleep. A few months later, it happened again. This time I saw the top of its head peering over the end of my bed, closer than before. I stayed that way until morning. A few weeks later, driving home from my job late at night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On a rural road, my headlights illuminated a figure crouched on the shoulder. It seemed to be leaning over a dead deer. I slowed down just enough to see its face. Pale, stretched, disturbingly human, but not quite right. I sped off, heart pounding. Months later, I was 8 hours north working as a counselor at a summer camp on the edge of Michigan's Huron National Forest. One night, my cabin group camped under the stars 5 miles from base. As we sat around the fire, one of the boys across from me went rigid, staring at something behind me. I turned just in time to see a shape disappear into the trees. Later that night, when the fire was dying down, the same boy suddenly screamed and pointed. Standing just beyond the brush, no more than 15 yards away, was that same ghastly, elongated figure. The same one I had seen in my room and on the roadside. It moved with a disturbing, jerking run, partly on all fours before vanishing into the dark. None of us slept that night. I'm 21 now and haven't seen anything like it since. Strangely, after that night, my sleep paralysis stopped completely. They say the rake appears in your dreams first, moving closer each time until it's nearly upon you. Then you start seeing it in real life, right before it decides to take you. I don't know if that's what it was, but I'll never forget those hollow eyes staring back at me in the firelight. Story 38. A few years ago, just before Christmas, I was working a night shift while my wife was home alone with our dog and cats. Shortly after midnight, she was woken up by the dog barking frantically. Assuming he needed to go outside, she got up, but quickly noticed he was fixated on the Christmas tree instead. Thinking maybe one of the cats had climbed it, she checked the branches but found nothing. She let the dog out for a few minutes, brought him back in, and went to bed. The next morning before I got home, she came downstairs to find the dog once again staring at the tree. All 3 cats were upstairs, so she decided to take a closer look. Behind the tree was a small shelf where we kept framed photos of her niece's graduations. But this time, there was a new photo nestled neatly between them, one we had never seen before. It was of a little girl, maybe 2 years old, dressed in a Christmas outfit, sitting beside a white cat. On the back of the picture, written in neat handwriting, were the words, Danielle, 1987. We were both baffled. The child wasn't anyone we knew, nor did the cat look familiar. We're the third owners of our home, so we contacted relatives of the family who owned it back in the 1980s. They didn't know of any Danielle, nor did they recall such a photo. My father-in-law, who was a police officer in town at that time, checked local records and found no accidents, deaths, or anything tragic connected to the house. The home was built in 1978 and had first been used as a model property for a new neighborhood. For years after that discovery, odd things kept happening, always tied somehow to the dog in that photo. The dog would bark at empty corners, whine at the shelf, or refuse to enter the living room altogether. After he passed away, everything stopped. Completely. We still have the photo, but it unnerves us both. We keep it in a safe place and only show people pictures of it on our phones. If we ever sell this house, we've already agreed. The picture will stay behind, along with a letter explaining everything that's happened. Story 39. When I was a junior in college, I went on vacation with my parents to Camden, Maine. This was before everyone carried cell phones, so there was no way to record what we saw. My parents had rented a small cabin in the woods, and late one night, around 1 a.m, I was in the loft reading, while a dry lightning storm flashed in the distance. There was no rain, just silent bursts of light across the sky. Then I saw something that made me freeze. Outside the large window, enormous glowing orbs, each about the size of a basketball, began drifting slowly downward through the trees. They emitted a steady white glow and descended at a calm, almost deliberate pace. I couldn't move for several minutes, my whole body locked in fear and awe. Finally, I scrambled down from the loft and woke my parents. My dad, a chemist by profession, went straight outside while my mom and I watched from the doorway. The lights continued.